Back in 2024, something incredible happened in Bangladesh. A student-led uprising, out of seemingly nowhere, toppled a government in just a matter of weeks. And in its place, this huge wave of hope for a new Bangladesh. But here we are, a year later. So what's the reality of that revolution today?
And that really is the question at the heart of this whole story, isn't it? We're going to dig into how a protest, a really focused one, just exploded into this massive nationwide movement. What did it promise? And more importantly, what are the huge challenges when you try to turn those revolutionary ideals into actual political reality?
So let's go back to the beginning, July 2024. It all kicks off with a protest against job quotas. Now, that sounds like a pretty specific issue, right? But the real spark, the thing that lit the fuse, was the government's violent response. And all of it, it was captured and shared all over social media.
Yeah, and this quote, this really says it all. It's from a student at a private university, the kind of person often seen as maybe a bit apolitical. But it just perfectly captures that shift. Suddenly, this wasn't just about jobs anymore. It became a moral outcry against injustice, against brutality. And that's what pulled everyone in.
And things escalated, incredibly fast. We're talking days. Student blockades morphed into these massive protests all over the country. The government's big move? An internet blockout, trying to kill the story. But that just backfired, big time. It paralyzed daily life, made people even angrier. And then you have the death of Abu Syed, standing there, arms open, in front of the police. It became this powerful symbol of defiance. By August 5th, it was over. The regime was gone.
And it wasn't just students anymore. This quote right here, from a rickshaw driver, he's helping a protester escape the police, it just shows you how the urban working class completely threw their weight behind the movement. It was all these little acts of solidarity. That's what turned it into a true mass uprising of the Chhatra Janata, the students and the people, together. So the old government is gone. An interim government steps in, and the feeling in the air is just electric, full of optimism. Because the goal here wasn't just to swap out one leader for another. No, this was about building an entirely new Bangladesh, a more accountable one. And this number, well, it really says it all. Right after the revolution, a staggering 71% of Bangladeshis believed the country was finally heading in the right direction. Can you imagine? The expectations for this new interim government were absolutely sky high. Okay, so the ambition here was just immense. The plan wasn't to just tinker around the edges. No, they wanted to fundamentally redesign the state itself, to make sure it couldn't slide back into authoritarianism. We're talking deep structural reforms. And one of the core proposals? Introducing a bicameral legislature. That's just a fancy way of saying a parliament with two houses. The whole point is to create checks and balances, right? So you don't have all of this power dangerously concentrated in the prime minister's office, like it was before. Now, how do you make that two-house system actually work? Well, a key part was this concept called the Navette principle. Basically, legislation just shuttles back and forth between the two houses. For most everyday laws, the lower house gets the final say. But, and this is so crucial, for any law that affects fundamental rights, the upper house has a really powerful veto. It needs a supermajority to pass. It's like a built-in emergency brake on any potential abuse of power.
Another huge piece of the puzzle was the bureaucracy, the civil service. The big idea was to shift from the old rank-based system, where you get promoted just based on seniority, to a position-based one. So you stop promoting people just because they've been there the longest. Instead, you hire and promote them based on the specific skills and qualifications they have for that job. What's the goal? A civil service that's way more effective and a lot less political.
Okay, so that was the blueprint. Incredibly ambitious, and the hope was just off the charts. But how has the interim government actually done 1 year later? Let's get into the reality check.
Well, that initial euphoria, it didn't last long. Remember that 71% optimism rate we saw back in August? By October, just 2 months later, it had already dropped down to 56%. The really difficult, messy work of governing was starting to set in.
And to really understand what's been going on, we're going to lean on this comprehensive one-year assessment from Transparency International Bangladesh, or TIB. Their report gives us a really detailed, critical look at both the progress and, the pitfalls. When it comes to getting justice, the reality has been, it's been mixed. And this table shows that tension perfectly. On one hand, you've got progress. Over 1,700 cases have been filed,
and the trial against the former prime minister is underway. But then you look at the limitations, and a whole lot of the accused have already fled the country. And even as the system tries to work, there are these deep-seated problems, like allegations of an arrest trade for extortion. I mean, that undermines the very justice the movement was fighting for. And you see a really similar story when you look at public administration reform. Yeah, on the surface, there's some progress. Over 1,300 officials who were unfairly held back under the old regime have finally been promoted. That's good. But the TIB report shows that deeper problems are still there. The administration is still plagued by politicization. It's basically just replacing one party's loyalists with another's. And that's a cycle that is incredibly hard to break. And it really highlights the massive challenge of true systemic change.
So, where does this all leave us? A year on, it's pretty clear that Bangladesh is stuck in the middle of a really difficult and very unfinished transition. There's this huge gap between the incredible aspirations of the revolution and the hard reality of governing. The TIB report really argues that these core issues are what's stalling all the progress. I mean, without a clear roadmap, the government just seems indecisive. And all the while, continued political influence and a lack of transparency are just eating away at public trust. And the tough part is, these are the exact problems the revolution was trying to fix, and they're proving unbelievably difficult to root out.
And that brings us to the final, really critical question. The July Charter, the document that outlined all these reforms, it was signed by the major parties, but with notes of dissent on some pretty fundamental issues. So with these deep disagreements baked in from the start, it really forces you to ask, can the pure, powerful ideals of a revolutionary movement actually survive the messy, complicated, and, let's be honest, often cynical pressures of day-to-day politics?